Chapter 9. The Final Piece. Valen stood quietly in the doorway of his old workshop, his aged eyes wandering slowly across the familiar room. A deep sense of nostalgia washed over him as he inhaled deeply, savoring the comforting blend of oil, aged parchment, and weathered metal, a mixture so distinct, so intimately tied to the happiest days of his past, that it felt almost like stepping back in time. It had been years since he'd last stood here, years since he'd abandoned everything and fled into exile. Yet, despite his long absence, everything seemed untouched. The tools sat exactly where he'd left them, their edges dulled slightly with age but otherwise ready and waiting. Workbenches stood lined with scattered scrolls and forgotten sketches, half-finished constructs frozen forever, just like in the moment he'd walked away. From deeper inside, a sound broke the silence, a soft mutter, followed quickly by the sharp clink of metal tools dropping onto a wooden surface. Valen smiled faintly as he turned toward the source. Cassius stood at a workstation on the far side of the room, shoulders tense and posture rigid with the strain of his efforts. His young protege hadn't yet noticed Valen's arrival, fully absorbed as he was in the intricate diagrams and notes spread chaotically before him. Cassius released a weary sigh, pressing his fingers into his temples as though to physically ease his growing frustration. Valen cleared his throat softly, stepping further into the workshop. Cassius spun around quickly, startled at first, eyes widening in surprise as recognition swiftly replaced confusion. For a moment the two men stood in silence, acknowledging each other's presence with solemn respect. Cassius stepped away from the cluttered desk, moving slowly toward Valen. The younger artificer's smile was warm, tempered by the weight of recent hardships. "Valen," Cassius spoke quietly, sincerity heavy in his voice. "It's been difficult without your guidance, but I'm glad you're safe." Valen reached out and clasped Cassius's shoulder firmly, meeting his protege's tired gaze. "I heard what you went through on your journey back from the Sanctum. Reid told me about Halvrin and Odrin. I'm sorry you had to endure such loss on my behalf." Cassius nodded slowly, his eyes briefly distant as memories surfaced before drawing himself upright again. "They made the ultimate sacrifice, Valen," he said quietly, resolve steadying his tone. "I owed it to them and to you to carry your research back here safely." Valen acknowledged this quietly, his heart heavy with gratitude. He moved toward the workbench Cassius had occupied, gesturing to the scattered scrolls and diagrams. "You've done far more than simply carry it, Cassius. You've immersed yourself completely. I'm deeply grateful." Cassius gave a weary sigh, shoulders slumping slightly. "Yet despite everything, I've barely made progress. The last 4 days I've done nothing but struggle to stabilize Fenrir's core. I've rerouted every energy path I could identify, integrated arcane circuits into every feasible configuration, and still, nothing." Frustration etched lines deeply into Cassius's features as he shook his head. "Every effort has failed. I don't know how much longer I can keep going in circles." Valen's expression softened as he picked up a parchment filled with detailed arcane circuitry, carefully examining the intricate work. He nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the tremendous effort Cassius had invested into solving this seemingly impossible puzzle. "Your skill isn't the problem, Cassius, nor your methods," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Fenrir isn't responding because it's not a construct of our world." Cassius raised a curious eyebrow, exhaustion briefly forgotten. "How do you mean?" Valen placed the parchment back down gently, turning to face Cassius fully. "Fenrir isn't rejecting our magic. It has no anchor to connect with it. Our methods were created to stabilize constructs made specifically for our world's magical fabric. Fenrir comes from elsewhere, a reality with its own laws and rules." Cassius leaned in, eyes narrowing with intense concentration. "Anchor?" Valen nodded slowly, pacing a little as he explained. "The Titanum Ferrum weren't simply powered by magic. They were intrinsically bound to it. Their cores were part of the world's energy, woven permanently into the very essence of the arcane currents that run throughout this realm." Cassius's eyes widened slightly, the revelation clicking clearly into place. "So Fenrir doesn't need mere stabilization, it needs a true binding, a permanent link like the Titanum Ferrum." "That's correct," Valen confirmed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Fenrir is an anomaly, foreign and isolated. To truly integrate it, we need to bind it permanently to our world's magic. A simple stabilization won't suffice." Just then, the workshop door creaked open, drawing the attention of both artificers. Reid stepped cautiously inside, glancing from Cassius to Valen, clearly trying to gauge their progress by their expressions. His own face reflected respectful uncertainty. He didn't pretend to grasp the details of their arcane and mechanical conversations, but he clearly understood the depth of their commitment. "Any breakthroughs?" Reid asked carefully, stepping closer to examine the scattered notes and diagrams. Valen nodded slightly, gesturing Reid closer. "Cassius has helped clarify our problem. Fenrir isn't rejecting magic, it's simply unable to connect with it in its current form. We must learn precisely how the ancient Titanum Ferrum were bound to magic." Reid studied the diagrams, his eyes narrowing with determination rather than comprehension. He turned to Cassius, seeing renewed hope kindling within the younger man's expression. "Then we find out how," Reid said decisively, the conviction firm in his voice. "Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out." Valen smiled faintly, appreciating Reid's unwavering confidence despite his limited understanding. Turning back to the workbench, he felt renewed determination surge within him. With Reid's firm support and Cassius's newfound clarity, the path ahead was finally clear. They didn't yet possess the answer, but now they understood exactly where to seek it: in an anchor. Recognizing their concentration, Reid quietly stepped back toward the workshop door. "I'll leave you two to your work," he said softly, giving a respectful nod. "If you need anything, send for me immediately." Valen acknowledged him with a quick glance. "We'll be sure to." "Thank you, Reid." As the door clicked shut behind Reid, Valen and Cassius immediately turned back to the workbench, shoulders pressed close together as they focused intently on the scattered notes and parchments. With newfound purpose guiding them, they sifted carefully through the sprawling mess of diagrams and sketches. Cassius watched closely as Valen's gaze sharpened, his finger tracing deliberately along a faint set of arcane inscriptions that ran alongside a detailed schematic he'd drawn years earlier. Valen's eyes narrowed, his hand suddenly pausing on a small, seemingly insignificant notation he'd nearly forgotten. A brief footnote, hastily scribbled in the margin years ago, easily overlooked among the larger, more complex calculations. He leaned in closer, breath hitching with recognition. "Cassius," Valen murmured urgently, tapping the parchment. "Here." "Look closely." Cassius leaned forward, brow furrowed in concentration as he followed Valen's finger to the subtle notation. His expression remained puzzled. "I see it, Valen, but I don't understand." "It looks incomplete, a discarded concept?" Valen straightened abruptly, realization dawning clearly across his aged features. "Precisely. I dismissed it back then as unnecessary, overly complicated for the designs we were working on at the time." He took a deep breath, excitement rising in his voice. "But now I realize, it wasn't about stabilization at all. It was never about control. It was about binding." Cassius watched as Valen turned swiftly from the bench, moving with surprising urgency for a man of his years, scanning the workshop frantically, eyes darting from shelf to shelf, drawer to drawer. "What exactly are we looking for?" Cassius asked cautiously, stepping forward to help his mentor, though he wasn't certain what he should even be searching for. "A ring," Valen responded cryptically, distractedly rifling through several boxes stacked high upon an old wooden shelf. "A small artifact, one I discarded years ago, believing its purpose obsolete." He glanced briefly toward Cassius. "I was wrong." Cassius nodded quickly, joining in the search as his eyes moved swiftly around the cluttered workshop. The minutes passed tensely, filled with the sound of metal shifting and parchment rustling. At length, Valen hesitated near the far corner of the workshop, eyes fixed upon an old, dust-covered cabinet tucked away behind a pile of discarded machinery. Quickly he began moving the machines aside, revealing the cabinet's hidden drawers and compartments. With a careful hand, Valen slowly opened a small drawer, untouched for many years, revealing a tiny cubbyhole. He reached in gingerly, fingers trembling slightly as he withdrew a small, cloth-wrapped object. Cassius stepped closer, curiosity intense in his eyes. Carefully, Valen unfolded the cloth to reveal a small metal ring, faintly engraved with intricate, almost impossibly delicate arcane symbols. "The tether ring," Valen whispered reverently, holding it gently in the palm of his hand, his voice a blend of awe and relief. Cassius studied the ring closely, eyebrows knitted in confusion. "I don't recognize it," he admitted, uncertain. "How is this tiny artifact supposed to help Fenrir?" Valen's eyes met Cassius's patiently. "This isn't just an artifact, Cassius," It's the anchor we've been seeking. It was originally created to bind mechanical constructs permanently to the magic of our world, allowing them to channel energy continuously without instability. It was deemed unnecessary long ago, as we found simpler ways to stabilize local constructs. But Fenrir isn't local, it's foreign, alien to our magic. We can't simply stabilize it, we must bind it. Cassius's eyes widened, realization finally lighting his features. You mean, this ring could allow Fenrir to permanently connect to our world's magic? Valen nodded slowly, carefully placing the ring onto the workbench beside Fenrir's diagrams. Yes, with the correct ritual, this tether ring can permanently fuse Fenrir's core to our world's arcane fabric, effectively becoming part of it. Fenrir would no longer reject our magic. It would thrive upon it, inseparable and immune to disruption. Cassius's excitement ignited instantly. Then let's begin. Tell me what you need me to do. Valen carefully laid out the parchments containing the binding ritual, methodically positioning them around the tether ring. Follow my lead carefully, he instructed, voice firm but calm. Each symbol must be traced precisely, each incantation uttered clearly. Even the slightest error could disrupt the ritual. Cassius nodded gravely, picking up a piece of charcoal to begin tracing the necessary runes onto the workbench surface, encircling the tether ring with precise care. Valen murmured quietly, guiding him patiently through each intricate detail. Cassius quickly grasped the ritual, demonstrating his skill and unwavering determination. Together they prepared the final stages, arcane circles and sigils glowing faintly upon the worn wood beneath their fingers. The workshop atmosphere grew dense, charged with a quiet power that hummed softly through the air. Valen lifted the tether ring, carefully placing it at the very heart of the intricate pattern they'd created. Cassius stepped back slightly, sweat beading lightly on his brow, eyes locked upon Valen. Are you ready? Valen took a deep breath, eyes fixed firmly upon the ring. Yes. Now Cassius. Together their voices rose softly, chanting the incantation with practiced precision. The runes glowed brighter, energies building steadily within the room, swirling gently around the tether ring. Cassius watched in amazement as the symbols etched into the ring flared to brilliant life, arcs of delicate magic connecting each rune to the artifact. Slowly, carefully, Valen reached out, gently picking up the now brightly glowing ring, feeling the pulsing magic beneath his fingertips. His eyes widened as the power surged through him momentarily, resonating with his own magic. He smiled broadly, exhilaration evident. It worked, Cassius whispered in awe, barely daring to breathe. Valen nodded, satisfaction and relief clear in his gaze. The ritual is complete. The tether ring is ready to bind Fenrir to our world's magic. Cassius drew a relieved breath, admiration evident in his gaze. Finally, he murmured softly, we've found our anchor. Valen set the ring down carefully, his hand steady now. Yes, Cassius. With this ring, Fenrir will finally awaken as it was always meant to be, bound and unbreakable. Their shared relief filled the room with quiet triumph, the gentle hum of the tether ring now promising something greater. Hope and victory, once so elusive, now firmly within their grasp. Valen turned quickly toward Cassius, his eyes alight with anticipation. Cassius, fetch Reid immediately, he instructed sharply, urgency clear in his voice. He needs to be here before we proceed any further. He should witness this himself. Cassius nodded without hesitation, swiftly making his way toward the workshop door. Moments later, his footsteps echoed back down the stone corridor as he hurriedly returned with Reid close behind. Reid entered with clear urgency, curiosity, and concern mingling on his face. Is it ready? I only just left, Reid asked cautiously, approaching Valen and eyeing the glowing tether ring resting carefully on the table. The intricate patterns of magic shimmering around the ring filled the workshop with a gentle hum, casting faint shadows on the walls. Valen met Reid's gaze, a solemn nod confirming their readiness. Yes, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. The ring is primed. Once connected, Fenrir will finally awaken. Reid took a steadying breath, stepping forward slowly to stand beside Valen and Cassius, his eyes locked on the small yet powerfully radiant artifact. Then let's not delay. I'm ready. Valen carefully lifted the glowing tether ring, cradling it gently as if it were fragile glass rather than enchanted metal. Cassius swiftly moved to Fenrir's dormant frame, as Reid carefully opening a small access panel that revealed the complex circuitry and delicate conduits, nestled deep within the machine's core. Valen approached Fenrir reverently, pausing only briefly to look at Reid one final time, silently seeking affirmation. Reid nodded once, firmly. Without further delay, Valen carefully inserted the tether ring into Fenrir's exposed core chamber. A tense silence gripped the room, each man holding his breath, waiting anxiously for any sign of response. At first, nothing happened, and the silence seemed deafening. Doubt flickered across Cassius's expression, his heart sinking briefly at the prospect of failure. Valen remained calm, steadfast in his conviction. He whispered a quiet phrase, ancient words resonating softly throughout the chamber. Suddenly, Fenrir's core chamber ignited with intense brilliance, the tether ring blazing like a miniature sun within the heart of the machine. Energy surged violently, cascading along Fenrir's dormant circuits in powerful arcs of bright white magic. Valen and Cassius stepped back swiftly, shielding their eyes from the intensity. The workshop began to tremble, tools and parchments rattling across surfaces and shelves as Fenrir absorbed the magical energy unleashed by the binding. Cassius watched with awe and exhilaration as Fenrir's internal systems lit sequentially, conduits and circuits glowing brightly, pulsing rhythmically as the mech's power surged. Servos and machinery, thought dead, groaned to life, the noise echoing sharply through the workshop. Fenrir shuddered deeply, metallic limbs and joints beginning to move tentatively, slowly at first, then with increasing smoothness. Reid stepped cautiously closer, heart pounding heavily in his chest, a deep sense of reverence overtaking him as he stood in Fenrir's growing shadow. He felt drawn inexorably toward the towering mech, sensing something powerful and magnetic emanating from it. As he approached Fenrir's armored chest, the mech seemed almost to welcome him, its massive frame lowering slightly as though inviting him to climb aboard. Valen and Cassius stood quietly to one side, eyes wide with anticipation, both men acutely aware of the gravity and significance of this moment. Reid climbed slowly into Fenrir's cockpit, his breath quickening slightly as the cockpit sealed securely around him. In that enclosed space, illuminated by the gentle glow of newly activated displays, Reid placed his hands carefully onto the controls, feeling a sudden rush of energy course through him. The neural link instantly established itself. Reid, welcoming it like an old friend, started threading through Reid's mind and senses, seamlessly connecting him to Fenrir. Instead of the overwhelming sensation he'd anticipated, Reid experienced a strange clarity and certainty, an intuitive connection so natural it felt as if he had always been part of Fenrir. Fenrir responded immediately to his every impulse, as if anticipating his thoughts rather than simply reacting to them. From within Fenrir's cockpit, Reid watched through the viewing panel as the workshop came into sharper focus, each detail impossibly clear. His senses extended through Fenrir, allowing him to experience the mech's surroundings as intimately as if he himself were standing in the room. Reid marveled at this new awareness, gently testing Fenrir's limbs and joints, sensing power and strength previously unimaginable. Slowly, Fenrir straightened to its full, towering height, servos humming strongly, powerfully resonant beneath armored plating. The mech no longer appeared to be a broken, useless machine, but rather a living, breathing entity, a powerful weapon seamlessly bound to this realm's magic. Below, Valen and Cassius looked upward with expressions filled with amazement and pride. They had succeeded, their countless hours of meticulous work finally vindicated. Cassius's expression softened into relieved joy, exhaustion entirely forgotten. Valen stood with quiet dignity, satisfaction clearly etched into his aged features. Fenrir lowered itself again, moving fluidly now, and carefully kneeled to bring the cockpit back to ground level. Reid emerged slowly, stepping out onto solid stone, his legs briefly unsteady. His breathing was deep and measured, his gaze alight with newfound confidence and clarity. "How did it feel?" Cassius asked eagerly, eyes bright with curiosity and wonder. Reid turned to Cassius, a calm smile crossing his lips. "I've never experienced anything like it," he replied, awe still evident in his voice. "It feels alive, like it's part of me now. More so than before." Valen placed a reassuring hand on Reid's shoulder, nodding deeply. "This is precisely what we hoped for. Fenrir is now an extension of you, perfectly attuned to your will. Together you are stronger than either could ever be alone." Cassius drew a steadying breath, eyes scanning Fenrir's glowing frame, visibly moved by their achievement. "The Empire won't know what's coming," he murmured softly, hope rekindling within him for the first time in many dark days. Reid met Cassius's determined gaze, feeling the truth of those words deep in his core. With Fenrir awakened, their odds had irrevocably shifted. Fenrir stood silently behind them, radiating quiet, potent power, a towering symbol of resilience and rebirth. Now, finally, they were prepared. The war machine had awakened, and it was ready to face the looming battle head-on, unstoppable and alive once more. In the quiet minutes following Fenrir's awakening, Reid, Valen, and Cassius remained in the workshop, each silently absorbed by the magnitude of their accomplishment. Valen meticulously checked over Fenrir's energy readings, ensuring the core was stable, while Cassius busied himself adjusting the finer calibrations of the mech's newly integrated tether ring. Reid simply stood before Fenrir, absorbing the quiet hum of power radiating steadily from the machine, feeling the gentle yet potent connection still lingering within him. Nearly 10 minutes passed when the silence was gently broken by the sound of footsteps approaching from the workshop. Althea stepped into the workshop courtyard, accompanied by Aldrich, her eyes widening in surprise and admiration as she beheld Fenrir standing fully awake and clearly transformed. She hesitated only briefly at the entrance, her gaze shifting from the newly revitalized war machine to Reid, who stood calm and steady, a quiet aura of certainty about him she had never witnessed before. "I heard Fenrir was operational," she began, voice gentle yet firm, curiosity and quiet awe evident. "I had to see it for myself." Reid turned, offering Althea a small, welcoming smile as he noticed the cloth-wrapped object she carried in both hands, something large and clearly significant. Before he could ask, she stepped forward purposefully, laying the bundle gently onto the workbench before him. Carefully, she unfolded the protective cloth to reveal a magnificent greatsword, gleaming faintly under the sunlight, its handle intricately engraved with unmistakable paladin runes. Reid immediately recognized the blade, his eyes flickering with surprise. "This sword," he murmured, carefully reaching out but not yet touching it, as though wary of disturbing the dormant magic within. "This was the sword carried by the paladin, Arendor, the one you fought outside the castle walls." Althea nodded slowly, her expression serious yet gentle. "It is. Arendor was a formidable enemy, and his blade carries great power. You've already achieved something extraordinary here today, Reid." She glanced toward Fenrir meaningfully. "It seems fitting that you wield a weapon worthy of your accomplishments, a sword befitting a warlord." Reid hesitated briefly, uncertain. "I appreciate the gesture, Althea, but I've never wielded magic, let alone a sword of this caliber. I'm not sure if I'm the one to—" Valen stepped closer, nodding encouragingly. "Reid, what we've accomplished with Fenrir has bound you to our world's magic in a profound and unprecedented way. Perhaps it has changed you more deeply than we initially understood." Cassius stood silently watching, clearly intrigued by Valen's words. Reid considered their encouragement, feeling drawn to the blade despite himself. Taking a breath, he reached forward and gripped the sword's hilt firmly. Immediately the sword responded, pulsing gently with an unmistakable surge of controlled magic. The feeling was remarkable, a connection more intuitive and intimate than Reid had imagined possible. He exhaled sharply in surprise, feeling the sword's power resonate comfortably within him. Cassius and Valen exchanged startled glances. Such a reaction was unmistakable, undeniable. The sword recognized Reid as a bearer, a wielder of paladin magic. "How is this possible?" Cassius asked quietly, amazement and curiosity mingling in his voice. "Reid has never trained in magic, let alone as a paladin." Valen stepped closer, examining Reid and the sword with an intense expression. "It's the binding," he explained, voice thoughtful. "The tether ring didn't merely anchor Fenrir, it linked Reid intrinsically to Fenrir's magical energy. Reid and Fenrir now share a connection deep enough that the blade itself acknowledges him." Reid hefted the sword experimentally, feeling its weight perfectly balanced and responsive, as though crafted specifically for him. His pulse quickened slightly as he realized the significance of this bond. "I've never been a swordsman," he said softly, more to himself than the others. "But this feels right." Valen nodded with deep satisfaction. "It is responding to your essence. You and Fenrir share a bond now, and it extends to the blade. With time, practice, and the strength of your connection, you'll wield it naturally." Reid turned thoughtfully toward Fenrir, considering the implications. If he could command magic through the sword, could Fenrir, linked deeply to him, wield it as well? The idea sparked something powerful within him, an exciting possibility too compelling to dismiss. Without speaking, Reid lifted the sword slightly towards Fenrir. Instantly, Fenrir's energy levels spiked, and Reid could sense Fenrir's profound resonance with the sword's magical energy, powerful yet perfectly synchronized. Althea stepped back, her eyes wide, quietly observing the interaction unfolding between Reid and Fenrir. Awe filled her expression, mingling with renewed hope and confidence. Cassius stepped closer, speaking softly in admiration. With Fenrir's strength and your bond with the Paladin's blade, we might stand more than a chance against the Empire. We might finally have the advantage. Valen nodded in agreement, his voice steady with quiet conviction. This sword was always meant for greatness. Reid, you've become a conduit, binding Fenrir, the blade, and yourself. You are no longer separate entities. You are a single force. Reid lowered the sword slowly, meeting Althea's gaze once more, his expression firm with quiet confidence. Thank you, Althea. You've given us something truly powerful. She smiled faintly, placing a reassuring hand briefly on his arm. You earned this yourself, Reid. I'm simply returning something that belonged in your hands all along. Sir Aldrich watched from near the door, his face somber yet approving. The blade chose you, he affirmed solemnly. Such magic does not happen lightly or by chance. Accept it as your right, Reid. Althea's quiet presence, the solid assurance of Valen and Cassius, and the firm, approving gaze of Sir Aldrich reminded Reid he was not alone. With allies like these, he would face the enemy head-on, not just as a soldier, but as a warlord, bound to a powerful machine and wielding a blade that resonated with his very being. It was early morning in the training yard beneath Castle Veletria, and a gentle mist lingered stubbornly over the grass and stones. Reid stood motionless at its center, his attention focused entirely on the paladin greatsword in his grip. Though the weapon was still new to him, he felt its presence keenly, a constant steady hum of quiet power, alive yet restrained. Nearby, Althea observed him silently, her stance relaxed yet alert, eyes carefully tracking Reid's every movement. They had arrived here shortly after dawn, Althea determined that Reid should quickly become accustomed to his new weapon. She had taken a moment to instruct him in the basic stances and grips, guiding him patiently as he adapted to the unfamiliar weight and length of the blade. Reid listened closely, attentive yet cautious, absorbing every word she shared. Now, with Althea standing a short distance away, Reid tested the greatsword, his initial movements careful and deliberate. He adjusted his grip, flexing his fingers slightly, feeling the gentle yet persistent vibration of energy within the blade. It felt different from anything he'd experienced before, distinctly separate from the powerful surge he'd known during Fenrir's activation, yet oddly complementary. Reid took a deep breath, allowing himself to explore that feeling carefully, letting it guide him. Althea observed quietly, eyes sharp and analytical, sensing every subtle shift in his posture, every faint flicker of energy moving along the sword's blade. Her gaze softened slightly in admiration at his deliberate care. Don't try to force the power, she advised gently, stepping forward slightly. Allow it to flow naturally. Paladin magic is intuitive, responding best when you let it emerge from within, rather than calling upon it forcefully. Reid nodded silently, relaxing his shoulders, releasing some of his tension. He drew a slow, steady breath, centering himself as he cautiously tested the sword again. This time, as he moved, a delicate ripple of energy pulsed through the blade, subtle yet undeniable. He felt it resonate through his fingertips, up his arms, flowing steadily through his body. It wasn't overwhelming or aggressive, but it was there, gentle, firm, and quietly powerful. Althea's gaze softened into approval as she watched Reid adapt, sensing the shift within him as clearly as if it were her own. She stepped closer, voice low yet encouraging. You're starting to understand the blade now. Your energy isn't purely paladin, but it resonates similarly. It suits you well, Reid. Valen had arrived quietly, joining Althea at the edge of the training area, watching Reid's progress with thoughtful contemplation. After several minutes of observing, he finally spoke, his voice calm but deeply intrigued. The binding of Fenrir has clearly altered him. Reid was never attuned to magic in our sense, yet he now commands this subtle energy with natural ease. It's remarkable. Althea nodded in agreement, her gaze never leaving Reid as he continued testing the weapon, growing visibly more confident and deliberate with every passing moment. Could it truly be the result of Fenrir's binding? she asked Valen quietly, careful not to distract Reid. Has it genuinely reshaped his essence? Valen nodded firmly, conviction strong in his voice. Yes. The tether principle anchored Fenrir directly to our world's magic, permanently stabilizing it. Reid's neural link to Fenrir is incredibly deep, perhaps deeper than we realized initially. I believe Fenrir's anchoring has indeed altered Reid's resonance. Not drastically, but enough to give him this subtle, unique connection. Cassius approached quietly, intrigued. So this power isn't exactly paladin magic? Valen nodded. No, it's something unique, born from Reid's bond with Fenrir. Reid paused his practice for a moment, gently resting the sword's point on the ground as he drew a slow breath, feeling sweat form lightly on his brow. He glanced briefly toward the others, noticing their quiet conversation. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Their theories were only confirming what he already intuitively sensed. He addressed them with a sense of calm clarity. Whatever this power is, it feels right. It feels natural. Not overwhelming like I'd feared, but intuitive. Valen offered him an approving nod. Precisely, Reid. Trust that intuition. This connection you have now, the blending of two worlds, it's the advantage we need. Althea stepped closer again, her gaze filled with deep admiration. It's more than power, Reid. It's confidence, strength, leadership. The sword chose you for a reason. Reid considered her words carefully, turning the blade thoughtfully in his grip, feeling its energy resonate gently within him. And Fenrir? Do you think it might wield the blade as well, through me? Althea's eyes sparkled briefly with excitement. I believe it's possible. Your bond with Fenrir seems strong enough. Imagine the power of the sword amplified through the mech, through you. Valen nodded enthusiastically. If true, it would greatly enhance your capability. Fenrir may very well channel that subtle magic into something even greater, amplifying your new strength. Cassius, still observing intently, voiced his agreement quietly. It would make you unstoppable, a force the Empire couldn't anticipate. With Fenrir's power magnified by paladin magic, they'd have no defense. Reid felt confidence swell deep within his chest. He raised the sword once more, sensing clearly its gentle hum of magic, his magic.